Good day, everyone. I am James Manrique, and I will be presenting on the error analysis of the interlanguage of Filipino learners of Korean as a foreign language. Well, how did we get here? Korean isn't really a global language per se, but there is a rising interest in learning the language among Filipinos over the past decade. First, working in Korea is lucrative, and foreigners are required to pass a practical Korean language test to be eligible to work in factories. Second, Korea has become an international cultural power through Hallyu, and Hallyu fans are interested in learning the language. Many institutions offer Korean language courses such as KCC, KSI, UP, Ateneo, PNU, and PUP, among others. Furthermore, in 2018, DepEd announced that through the special program in foreign language, Korean will be one of the 5 languages to be taught in select junior high schools in the country. With the increasing number of Filipino learners of Korean, you'd expect that KFL acquisition research would also be booming. However, ESL was and still is king in the Philippines. With regard to foreign languages, most studies only explore learner motivations. If you look outside the country, there are a lot of KFL research like in the US, China, Japan, Malaysia, Myanmar, Thailand, etc. This research now aims to fill this gap. Moreover, the present study may also help both Filipino language teachers and learners of Korean, and that it can A. Inform language teachers where the learner is in terms of their language learning progress and what steps to take in order to increase learners' proficiency, and B. Make language learners aware of the errors that they commit, thus giving them the opportunity of using these errors as tools to improve their correction and feedback. The study aims to provide relevant quantitative and qualitative explanations on patterns of errors present in the written interlanguage of Filipino learners of Korean by attempting to identify these errors in written text of Filipino learners of Korean across different target language proficiency levels and classify these errors according to type, level, and occurrence rate. Many studies use interlanguage and error analysis in exploring learner language and target language acquisition. Since we also want this research to be comparable with existing studies in the field, we also employ the same frameworks. If we look at second language acquisition as learning, like learning a first language instead of teaching, we can look at errors or deviations from a target language as a normal stage of a person's linguistic development. Error analysis helps tell the language teacher how far towards the goal the learner has progressed, the researcher how language is learned or acquired, and the language learner what to improve on. We differentiate a mistake, which reflects language performance, from errors which are systematic and reflects language competence of a learner. The data for this research was collected in May 2021 with the help of students enrolled in Korean language courses offered by the UP Department of Linguistics during the academic year 2020-2021. Students were divided into 3 proficiency levels: beginner, intermediate, and advanced, based on the highest level of Korean language course the student has taken. For beginner, students were asked to write short compositions in Korean following prompts that I have provided. I also personally identified and classified the errors in the data. For intermediate and advanced, however, students were asked for copies of written compositions submitted as course requirements. Since there is already teacher feedback for these compositions, these were used to identify the errors, and so I only needed to classify them. Error categories are as follows. For type, omission, addition, selection, and ordering. For level, orthographic, grammatical, and lexical. A quantitative analysis was also done to compare the frequency of occurrence of different error types across proficiency levels. Let's look at some numbers. A total of 38 compositions containing 644 sentences were collected from 16 students. As seen in this table, 59.47% of the sentences have at least one error. For beginners, 54.47%. For intermediate learners, 51.13%. And for advanced learners, 70.59%. Error Density Index, or EDI, seen in the last column, is a metric that compares the number of errors a learner committed with the number of sentences they produce. A perfect composition, or a composition with no errors, has an EDI of 0. We can see that beginners have, on average, 1.1 mistakes per sentence, intermediate learners 0.81, and advanced learners 1.78. So here, we can see that advanced learners make twice the number of errors as intermediate learners. We'll get back to that in a bit. Let's first look at the errors in detail. After identifying the errors, we now classify them according to type. First, we have omissions. An error of omission is committed when an item that must be present in a well-formed utterance is absent. We distinguish them from both ellipsis and zero, which are allowed by grammar. First, omission of space. Korean has spacing rules as well, as seen in this example. Second, omission of particles. Particles are postpositions usually added to nouns, typically marking case. Korean particles are kind of weird. In writing, they are required to be present, but in speech, they can be dropped. Not dropping particles in speech can sometimes make you sound stiff, but since we're analyzing written compositions, we look for them. Next, omission of complementizers. Korean has a relatively more complicated direct and indirect quotation strategy, so this can be quite difficult for learners. Omission of conjunction and transitional devices. As with any good writing, transitional devices make your thoughts more coherent. Errors of addition are the opposites of omissions. They occur when an item that should not appear in a well-formed utterance is present. This often occurs due to overgeneralization or too faithfully following certain rules. Unnecessary spaces often occur in noun plus verb constructions. Some Korean verbs can be broken down into its noun and verb components, and as such, learners can sometimes put space between them where there shouldn't be any. Multiple particles can be strung together to form complex meanings. However, some particles cannot be used with others, and they are, in a sense, overwritten. Learners sometimes forget to do this. Korean is quite conservative about using pronouns, only explicitly mentioning them when emphasizing or changing topic. However, pronouns in English and Filipino are important. As such, it sometimes reflects in their Korean as well. Related to particle and pronoun dropping is this error of redundancy. Korean is a context-dependent language. Once a topic has been established in discourse, you can talk without mentioning the topic and will still be understood. Here, the phrase internet language has already been mentioned in the first half, so there was no need to mention it again in the latter half. Third type of error is selection. Errors of misselection or misformation occur when the wrong form of the morpheme or structure is used. As the original definition covers only errors of grammatical extent, it is hence expanded for the purpose of this research. Misspells may be categorized as selection errors whose extent is orthographic, while substitution errors, like assumed synonymity or collocation errors, are categorized as selection errors whose extent is lexical. First, misspells. In one misspell in this example, the grapheme for the plain velar plosive kiyak was replaced with the tense velar plosive sangkiyak. Moreover, they visually appear similar, so errors of this kind is common. Borrowed words are also prone to misspellings. Here, dress must be transliterated into dress, but it was spelled dresi. In misselection of particles, cases are inappropriately marked. Here, manhwa is marked with the subject marker ga instead of the object marker re. Or the opposite, effects is marked with the object marker e instead of subject marker e. Another common particle misselection is e versus etho. They both mark locations like Tagalog sa, but etho typically marks where an action occurs, while e marks the goal of a locomotive action. Many morphemes in Korean have two forms, alternating whether the sound preceding it is a vowel or a consonant, with some exceptions of course. This sometimes trips learners up. As for lexical misselections, we have assumed synonymity, where items typically synonyms are used interchangeably in contexts where substitution is not applicable. Here, the conjunctions unika and umuro both mean because, but unika has a slight nuance of subjectivity, while umuro is exclusively used in formal writing. Here, Pohamdada means to be included, used typically with objects, but was used to mean feel included or feel that they belong, when sosokam or sense of belonging is a more appropriate word to use. Collocation errors typically occur when idioms are translated into the target language word for word, breaking collocations. In this example, the student literally wrote, feel a lot of stress when the correct collocation in Korean is receive a lot of stress. Utterances in Korean are always along a politeness spectrum. Nouns, verbs, and pronouns can change form depending on the politeness level of the sentence. Here, the sentence is written in the so-called plain style. As such, the pronoun for I must be na. However, 저, the pronoun for I in polite speech, was used instead. Here, 이랑, meaning and, is only used in speech. The written equivalent must be 과. The last type of error is ordering. An error of misordering is committed when a unit or a group of units are incorrectly placed in an utterance. Here, the subject particle is incorrectly placed in relation to the noun number counter phrase construction. Also, and only in English, can typically go anywhere in the sentence without affecting the meaning of the sentence. However, in Korean, the meaning changes depending on where you attach the particle. Here, the incorrect sentence reads, I too make music, implying that there are other people who make music too. The meaning intended was I, in addition to other things, make music too. To negate a verb which is comprised of a noun and a verb, you must split them and add the negation an between them. This is important as noun plus verb adjective is never split and the negation goes before it. Korean predicates prefer verbs and adverbs over nouns and adjectives. Here, the construction literally reads, the study is passionate, while it is more fluent to say, passionately studying. Lastly, general word order errors are committed usually when there are embedded clauses involved, such as in this example. To zoom out a bit, here is a frequency count of errors classified by type and extent, grouped by proficiency level. If you noticed from before, the total number of sentences per proficiency level is not equal. Only 20% of the corpus is from beginners. So this means that the numbers in intermediate and advanced are inflated. To make this irrelevant, we normalize these numbers using the error density index. Now, these numbers show a more accurate picture of our data. What we're trying to see here is which errors appear more often in specific proficiency levels. But there is a lot of numbers and it's a bit confusing, so we perform a Kruskal-Wallis test. A per document analysis of the dataset points us to where we can look at. Here we see what error classes have significant differences within a 0.05 level of significance in EDIs across proficiency levels. Now, let's go back to the previous table. Now we see which rows are relevant. Not only we can definitively say that given our corpus, more errors are committed by advanced learners, but also that they commit more selection, grammatical, and lexical errors. Beginner learners also commit more lexical additions. So what does this all mean? First, the computation of EBI suggests that an advanced learner is twice more likely to commit an error compared to an intermediate learner. The beginner learner's probability is only a tad bit higher than that of the intermediates. The Kruskal-Wallis H-test says that the difference is significant and non-negligible. Moreover, comparisons between groups showed which errors are more likely to be committed per proficiency level. It should be noted that while the test is non-parametric, the sample size is still too small for comfort. In further researches, it is suggested to prepare a larger corpus in order to get a more meaningful quantitative analysis. While not exhaustive, we also determine the kinds of errors that appear typically in the learner's written composition. One may expect that error rates will decline as proficiency level goes up. The data suggests otherwise. We could make some inferences as to why this is the case. First, advanced learners have longer sentences. Since the EDI's denominator is the number of total sentences, it will inevitably be higher if the learner joins multiple clauses to form a single more complex sentence. Second, Learners of higher proficiency know more vocabulary and grammar and may dare to generalize and play around when writing. But in doing so, they expose themselves to higher chances of committing errors. Lastly, the data on advanced learners were taken from courses that specifically aim to improve writing and reading skills. On the other hand, the courses taken so far by beginner and intermediate learners focus on oral communicative skills. Some constructions in the advanced levels may be grammatically correct and felicitous, but deemed awkward by a native speaker, hence marked as errors. Again, only expanding the corpus and having more data points will allow us to get a clearer and more accurate picture of errors across proficiency levels. Through this research, we now have an overview of the kinds of errors Filipino learners of Korean commit in written texts. Future research may now focus on specific kinds of errors in order to describe in detail how these errors arise and, eventually, how Korean is acquired by Filipino learners. Ultimately, this study wishes to serve as a starting point for further research on KFL acquisition of Filipino learners. Here are the references used in this research. And again, this is error analysis of the interlanguage of Filipino learners of Korean as a foreign language. Thank you for listening and have a great day.